The button has been pushed. Hello and welcome. What's up, guys? Last week we were blessed with Peter Rowan, and this week I can't be happier to tell you that we have Mr. Christopher Henry with us. What's up, Chris?
Howdy, howdy. Everything's good. Yeah, up here
That's
in Winchester, Virginia. It's a beautiful day and glad to be with you here today for sure.
Man, thank you so much for visiting. And most importantly, thank you for doing this interview while Shay is still away at Winter Wondergrass up in Steamboat. I know he is super jealous, but we'll miss him, but we'll do him some justice. You're up north. Are you perhaps with your mom and dad?
Yeah, I was doing some recording here. One of my mom's students, Heidi, she's got some good songs. And so we spent a couple days putting tracks down and things turned out well. And so, yeah, it's really nice to be able to work with my mom. And, she's kind of been the co-producer with all of that. And yeah, I love to do recording up here with mom and dad, get to visit. My dad and I are also working on a new album. And so we were doing some mixing and some overdubs last night. So it's been a very productive visit here.
Well, and for people that don't know, both of your parents are musicians, correct? It's Red and Murphy, right? Are their
Yeah,
names?
Red and Murphy Henry. And I think that a lot of folks might be familiar with the Murphy method, which is learn how to play bluegrass by ear. Mom and dad started that back in the early 80s, and they had a bluegrass band down in the 80s called Red and Murphy and Company and did 7 record albums and were real popular with the festivals and circuit back in those days. My mom's a wonderful songwriter and an author and banjo picker. My dad's an amazing mandolin player. And so, yeah, we grew up with tons of bluegrass. My sister Casey plays the banjo. And so most people might be familiar with the Henrys from the musical education on the by ear side of.
So So you obviously come from like a long line of musicians, and didn't you actually make an album with your sister together?
Yeah, back a long time ago when I was kind of first in Nashville, we had a band called Casey and Chris and the Two Stringers, and we had Tyler Grant playing guitar with us, and Amanda Kowalski playing the bass, and then Missy Raines actually recorded the bass on the project, and that was a good album. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. So with your parents being musicians and educators, and obviously creating this learning by listening and hearing, how was it for you growing up? Like how quick did you pick up an instrument, and what was it like living in a house like that just full of creativity and music?
Yeah, so I wouldn't change it for the world. It was a whole lot of fun, meeting mom and dad's band members and a couple of my aunts played in their band. And so there were jam sessions happening at the house. And I even asked for a jam session for my third birthday. And I'd take my little ukulele around and kind of strum it. And I think sometimes back in those days, I was even strumming it left-handed, but the music was going in. So I was hearing all these songs and hearing the harmonies and hearing the power of the music. And mom and dad's band, they played a lot of stuff with a lot of drive. And so that was getting me up on my feet and I wanted to dance to it. And so by the time I was ready to, I learned mandolin chords when I was like 4 or 5, I think four, G, C, and D, but I hurt my fingers, wasn't too keen on all that. And then I picked up ukulele, I don't know, 8 or 9. But by the time I was picking up the ukulele, I could already kind of hear chord changes a little bit, and I knew a bunch of songs. And so that made it so much easier. There was so much music on the hard drive already. It made it easier for me to just be able to find the flow and sing a little bit. And then I was picking out, Old Joe Clark and Soldier's Joy when I was 10, 11 years on the mandolin. And so it was just always around and it was just what we did. And so it was always very natural that way. And mom and dad were very encouraging. Mom was just telling this story yesterday to Heidi, the lady that we were recording her songs. She was talking about when I had figured out how to play the bass. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning before school and maybe before mom's coffee. And I was like, Mama, I can play the bass. And so she just without hesitation join me in the studio and watch me play the bass to Fireball Mail or whatever. So there was all kinds of positive encouragement, which is just so important. It can be critical for little people to feel like it's a good thing for them to do. One of the worst things is when people get told they can't play or they can't sing or they're tone deaf or something like that. That can be a big bunch of karma to unravel, which is it's really kind of devastating because it can be the most fun thing in the world to be able to play, for yourself with other people and all that. And sometimes that's a good journey for people to work through that and then find their voice and empower themselves. But yeah, mom and dad were always really super enthusiastic with us. And, of course, one advantage of learning how to play when you're little is you get up on stage and you play your old Joe Clark, kind of, and you might miss some notes and you might sing off key or whatever. And people are just like,
Yeah.
yeah, keep going.
Be like,
Dear
look
God.
at how cute he is.
Yeah.
But I mean it's super cool because I mean you talk about like the environment being created, right? And like obviously
Yeah.
you were harbored into this wonderful situation. But what you also have to understand is as a teacher, you can be that outlet for people that may not be getting that, right? And like
Yeah.
not always do we have supportive parents or people that are like musically inclined or understand. And then we find people within the community like you who are these like glowing orbs of energy that then other people can like feed off of. And then you have all of these different people that have influenced so many others. And in bluegrass, it's so beautiful because like we all have like that role like in a pick, right? And then for you to be so young and now, okay, all right, I picked up the mandolin, right? All right, well now I played the uke, right? And now I'm playing the bass. And so when you're listening and you're hearing each tone, right? And you know each part for like such a young mind to then listen to music, like you're 30 steps ahead. Like I have friends who are 30 and 40 who still have no clue. Like, oh, do they all just like get a turn and is it the same time every time? Like, how does that work? And it's
Yeah.
cool because like it gave you an advantage. So then what did you like obviously you're playing, when did you realize like this is it, right?
Well, I think, two pieces to that. The first thing was that it was, such positive attention coming from the two most important people in my life. And so if it had just been that, that would have been good. But to be able to get up on stage and hear people, clap. I remember first time I got on stage was at Otter Springs down in Florida, I think, maybe Southern Georgia. Bluegrass Festival. Mom and Dad were, I think, closing the show, and they got me up to play on the very last number. I had my ukulele there, and my dad pulls his mandolin mic down for me to sing into. And I sang, and the people clapped, and that was my observation that I related to my. I sang, and the people clapped. And so, yeah, that's just, a big springboard energetically to feel like you're doing something good. And of course, the cuteness factor kind of wears off, and they said, "Well, they're not clapping like they used to." Now I got to figure out something that is actually entertaining for these people, and that's a moving target that continues to be, understood, more and more. Of course, you go through different phases with your own music, and I loved, bluegrass, and got into the punk rock thing when I was in my teenage years, and then drifted into drums. And drums was my main instrument for 2 or 3 years there, playing really fast, punk rock. A lot of parallels between the energy of punk rock and some of that, metal and bluegrass, and I felt that kind of resonance there. And with the teen angst, it's a good way to bang drums and be loud and write songs that you might be embarrassed about later. And but that real intensity of the bluegrass music and the commonality with punk rock and all that, and made the rounds into hip hop and some electronic music and all that kind of stuff. That center of like being able to express aggressive energy which exists within the spirit or energy of a young person, I really fed off that for a long time. And then led my own band for a few years, and I got a lot of that out. I was able to play a lot of cool shows across the country, and went to Australia 4 times, a couple times with Peter, a couple times with my own band. So I had a lot of you know good things happen, dreams come true. Got to play the Grand Ole Opry, got to meet so many of my heroes and all that kind of stuff. And all that to say is that I got a lot of that kind of angsty energy out through my music.
Mhm.
And then after a lot of reflection, really into Bill Monroe and the lonesome side of things and the blues and all that. And it took a long time for all of that energy to kind of cycle through. And then I reflected on that. And, especially with regard to, Bill Monroe and so many of these, bluegrass heroes who, were wonderfully expressive and creative musicians, but did not maybe have the best mental health, bless their hearts and souls and all the appropriate blessings.
Yeah.
A lot of substance abuse in bluegrass and all kinds of different music. But that lonesome thing, if you can't escape that, then that can be a problem. So when I found my way into the Peruvian plant medicine world, a lot of that stuff started healing. So my relationship to the hardcore, like my band was called, the hardcore grass. And I was really into this hardcore thing.
Yeah.
It lost its luster, pretty quickly there. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, you don't want to have these blues. A cat like, Del McCurry, when he was singing, I feel the blues moving in back in the mid 90s, when he was just moving to Nashville with his boys and they were playing for 10 people at the station inn before he had all the successes and the grandkids and the Grammys and all that. You kind of see the progression with Dell. Like he lost his blues,
Yeah.
and so that's a big win. And he like rang the bell for success doing this amazing thing, with bluegrass becoming the most popular bluegrass entertainer there for a long time, probably up until the current era with Billy Strings. But all that to say is that so like when he sings the blues now, you'd be like, well, you're not as blue as you used to be, and that's a good thing. And to me, that's the goal with the whole thing. You want to use the music in a positive way to express, to get this energy out, and then hopefully move on to being a happier, more balanced person. And of course, that can come in many different ways. For me, it was a lot of, meditation and lots of powerful plant medicine. But so all that to say is that I went through this whole, progression with blues and bluegrass and the lonesomeness and kind of getting it out. And then now I'm at a happier place in my life. I've been married for it'll be 6 years in June, and
Congratulations.
good. And so my draw towards that hardcore thing with the music has largely evaporated. And there's a time and a place to kind of lean into it and play the blues and all that kind of stuff. But it's not just this awful kind of burden thing that it was like, oh, I just got these blues. And like, I remember this story that I got a friend named Billy Smith. He's a great songwriter in Nashville. He's had a lot of hits for Dell and actually we had a song that Dell recorded. It was one of my few co-writes that I did in Nashville, and Dell put that on his last album. It's called She's Heavenly, and it was a duet with Molly Tuttle. Anyway,
That's
so
awesome.
Billy Smith and Bill Monroe had a close relationship. Some of y'all might know this story about how his mom moved to Nashville with Billy and his brother Terry, who plays bass with the Grascals, and they actually went to live and work on Bill Monroe's farm while their mom was dating Bill Monroe. So Billy and Bill Monroe had a very close relationship. And towards the end of Bill's life, they're out on the farm, I think, one time, and Bill Monroe says to Billy, he says, who's your friends? And Billy goes, well, my brother and, you know, John Hedgecoth and, Terry Eldridge and Ed Dye, and he just listed off some of his friends. And then Billy says to Bill Monroe, he says, who's your friends? And Bill goes, I don't know. And I just thought that was so lonesome. I was like,
Mhm.
okay, this is a big, message from the universe that there are many admirable things about, Bill Monroe and his music, but you don't want to be, 80 years old and then being like, I don't know who my friends are.
Well, you don't want your brand and identity not to align with your own personal life and aspirations, right? And so like that
Definitely.
lonesomeness, it may be great to have that foundation because we all have ups and downs in life, right? And we connect emotionally to so much of that storytelling or those feelings through, or you can hear the sorrow in those licks, right? And like we think about those lonesome times, but if that is what you're doing night after night after night after night, right? You
Yeah.
have to understand that there's gonna be like that mental struggle with it. And so it's cool to hear so many people nowadays talking about their struggle through that and then getting to the other side. And to be perfectly honest, I was so stoked to talk to you about plant medicine because I'm not gonna lie, Christopher, I'm pretty sure the shirt that you had on when Billy pulled you up on your birthday was one of the ayahuasca excursions, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So my wife and I, we go down to Peru about once a year, and we study with our amazing teacher, Papa Gilberto Malwa, and he's Shipibo. And so a lot of times they'll offer shirts and pants and textiles that we can take back. And but sometimes the quality of like the pants and the shirts isn't too great, and so we brought some stuff down and had clothing embroidered
Oh,
one of the women in the village there. And so yeah, I had Bobinsana, one of my main trees, and Chirisanagito, my main plant, on the shirt, and then on the back is Noyorao, our main tree. So it's nice to have that opportunity to wear that shirt in front of all those people, and feels a bit lucky that way.
Well,
Yeah.
now I feel lucky because like I want to use that moment to help educate some people on some of these journeys and experiences, and it doesn't have to be personally to what you're doing, but how long ago was it that you discovered some of these alternative options, and when was it that you took your first journey down there? And so that people can understand, because they like, I guess they think like Aaron Rodgers, right? And they like think these
Oh
things,
yeah.
but for me, I think like medicinally, and like I've had military friends who had battled PTSD forever, or like
Yeah.
hardcore addiction, or like just so much emotional turmoil, and they can go and they take one of these journeys. So I would really love to talk about this if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty much my favorite thing to talk about. And, after kind of recreationally exploring psychedelics like you do in your teenage and early 20 years, I start to read about shamanism and hear about these visionary experiences. And I was also very intrigued about the Icaros, which are the center of all of it. And so I had some connective experiences and decided I want to go down to Peru and experience it in the traditional setting. And I had been watching some YouTube videos of a young woman named Taylor Marie who was putting up videos about her experiences down there. And through her network, I found out about El Jardín de la Paz, which is near Tarapoto, and just took a leap of faith. And I'll tell this quick story. This is kind of funny. I was out in Colorado actually, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to pay for this trip. And this guy from Tennessee calls. He's like, "Hey man, won't you come down here and play for us? And what do you feel like you could do it for?" He's asking how much I'd charge.
Yep, for a
And I said,
private
"Well,
show.
what's that?"
For a private show, right?
Yeah, well, it was a public show,
Okay.
not too far from Nashville. And but so Butch Baldassari, who's since passed on, is a great Italian mandolin player and producer. He gave me this line. He's like, "This is a great music business line." He says, "When somebody asks you how much you're going to charge, you say, 'How much can you give me without hurting yourself?'" And so I was thinking, like, okay, it'd be good to get like at least $500 to play. Well, how much can you give me without hurting yourself? He said, "Well, about $1,700 to it." I was like,
I
"Yeah, I
got
think I
one more
can do
way.
that." And so that was my ticket money for Peru. And so ended up down there and meeting the fella who owns the place down there, who ended up being a real good friend, and the mestizo curandero who was there, and did my first diet with chuchuasha. And so chuchuasha is a big strong tree down there. And one of the things I learned that was just a mind-blowing thing is that the trees teach the shamanism, and which is kind of a strange thing for our Western mind to wrap around. So like the ayahuasca is, two plants. It's a vine, the ayahuasca vine, and then the chacruna leaf. And the chacruna leaf has the DMT, which allows you to go to the visionary space. That doesn't happen all the time, of course, but the ayahuasca vine allows the DMT to be orally active. So if you just, eat a bunch of DMT, it's not going to get in your system. But the MAOI kind of turns your system off so it doesn't, just neutralize the effects of the DMT. And so the dieta in Shipibo, the sama, is the deeper aspect of the ayahuasca world where you can go and you can work it with a specific tree or a specific plant, depending on what you're working on. And there are different properties and medicinal benefits. And so chuchuasha, and a lot of the times the trees are really good for protection because when you get into the DMT world, you're way open. And so like this line between your conscious mind and your unconscious is more permeable. And so if you do the diet with the trees, which means you strip back no salt, no sugar, no sex, no internet, hopefully, and not talking to a lot of people. You get real sensitive. Sometimes there's fasting involved.
Hmm.
Then you can start a communion with these very powerful, ancient elemental spirits of the plants and the trees. And this is the deeper aspect of it. And they can teach you songs, and you can learn the songs in your diet, and then you can sing those songs in the ayahuasca ceremony. And their spirits can come in, and you can have visions and lots of healing in different directions. But you hit the nail on the head, especially with trauma that can be really hard to get to. And, you might have heard that, a koshi, which means strong in Shipibo, ayahuasca ceremony can be like 6 months of therapy in one night. And it certainly can be that way. And so if you're in this diet for a long, period of time, an entry length of time would be like, a week or 10 days. The longer diets can go on for years, months on end, where you're just staying in this sensitive state and learning and growing and purging. A lot of people hear about the purging aspect of ayahuasca and they're like, no, thank you. That's not for me. But that's one of the parts that you learn to love the most. And it just, anyway, so
No,
this whole,
it's that release, right? Like even in the recreational journeys that we've had, we've been there where it's like, oh, I just need to get this poison out of me, and then you get it out, and then your environment around you is completely changed for that moment, right? And so like I can only imagine in a ceremony like that how much more powerful it is. And people are like, oh, gross, you're getting rid of something. It's like you literally getting rid of something, right? You could be getting rid of that those bad feelings or the memories because we spent so much time burying it, and there's nowhere to hide during these ceremonies, right? And I think that a
very
lot of people that are afraid to do this just want to continue to suppress those emotions and feelings, and they don't want to challenge themselves to really see what can happen from it, right? So how
yeah.
many years ago was your first ceremony, and then how often have you been going now recently?
Yeah, I went down there at the end of 2015. And so this will be 10 years of dieting. And it took me a little while to realize that you really need to follow the rules that you were given. And if you don't, you can get into a lot of trouble and you can learn things the hard way. And I definitely did that and got the t-shirt and yeah, wrote some songs about that. But you learn, and once you can get on track and you work hard, the plants and the trees, they're fair, and so they can allow you to make up for your transgressions, especially if you're trying your best to work it all out. And so yeah, 10 years ago, and then I like to go back about once a year. And so we went back in October, and that was our, I don't know, my fifth or sixth time down there to the village of Pauyan on the Ucayali River. We met our teacher, Papa Gilberto, when he made one of his rare trips outside of the country. That was in Guatemala, dieting the Noyorao tree. And he's just amazing. He's been doing it since he was like 10 or 11 years old. If you can imagine, like drinking this very powerful, like shamanic tree by yourself, and then like drinking ayahuasca every night or every other night for a year by yourself, when you're like 10 or 11 years old. And then that being your life. So, like, we met him, 50 years later, and he's just mind-blowingly amazing and can sit and sing in ceremony for 3 or 4 hours and just straighten everybody out. It's kind of unfathomable, especially to our Western mind, to consider, what's going on with these masters of the Amazonian plant science. But he's one of the living legends, and he comes from a family of 5 or 6 brothers who are all well-known curanderos. And I think he had a couple of his grandparents who were Murayas, which is the highest level of Amazonian shamanism. That's when you get into the shape shifting and all kinds of fantastic stories. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I wanted to ask, and I wonder if you had conversations with him because people talk about entering a similar world, right, and seeing similar visions and deities and entities. And so, do you feel like that's kind of been true for you with some of your ceremonies going back so often?
Yeah, absolutely. And
God, that's so cool, right? Like for me, like that is just like so amazing because you're literally just like opening a door to another universe. and then you're exploring, right? And so sometimes obviously like that first exploration can be so scary and so dangerous to you that you're like, oh, I can never do that again. But then like there's the adventurers that are like, hey, I want to go and now I want to like look around this corner. Or you like start challenging yourself. So like, and what I love is that you're actually doing the full-fledged like cultural influence, and you're learning the history, you're learning the songs, you're learning the journey, right? And like how much more it makes sense probably, right, than like going to, oh my god, I'm going to Tulum and I'm going to do this ceremony, like damn it, please stop. Like that's cool too, and I'm sure that they get things from that too, but there's a reason these things exist. And so for you with like the history of shamanism, and then like you're saying to have one of these like, now I'm going to sound like typical white dude, like OGs, right? Like one
Yeah.
of these guys that can really like lead you on this journey and trip. That is so cool. So like how was it for you going time after time? And then do you set like goals for yourself on things that you're trying to challenge yourself on or continue to expand on, or what's that kind of like?
Yeah, for sure. It's something that, starts with your baseline. And so when you're working with the trees, when you get into this permeable state, it's great to have the relationship with the trees and the protection to allow you to stay grounded, like with your connection with the earth, like the roots of these trees growing in your spirit. So you're really grounded when you're starting to expand. So the idea, like if your roots are way down deep in the ground, that way when you're lifting up and the cosmic, current is coming through your channels, you're not just like whipping around in the wind. But yeah, so I mean, like typical journey, it's all about, learning about your mind and how to control the mind. And so the meditation has been a big baseline aspect of the whole thing. When I really started to get serious about doing it the right way, Chuchuwasha, my first tree that I died, it was like, you're going to be a meditator now. And it's going to be an hour a day, and it's going to be that way every day. And so that's the baseline of my whole world, 30 minutes, as much as I can in the morning. And then if I don't finish the 30 minutes, then it would be at least 30 minutes in the evening before going to bed. And so allowing yourself to have the space to just be still, to practice breath meditation, to practice serenity. So all these changes that you're experiencing, in the strong ceremonies can integrate, and it can be very intense. And so it's important to cultivate being able to calm your system down, to be able to calm your mind down, because it can be very confusing a lot of times. There are lots of different energies that swirl around. But when you're doing your diets well and you're putting a lot of work into it, and like so when you're just kind of sitting there sweating in your tambo, it's a good thing, I feel, to be like really creative. So whether that's like, drawing or journaling or, songwriting, it's good to have these focuses so you're not just like just sitting there and like, scrolling on your phone while you're trying to like do spiritual work. So I turn my phone off, when I'm down there. It's a nice break from the internet and all that, but it does kind of unfold, one little piece at a time. The plant that my favorite plant, Chiri Sanangito, uh, also known as Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, or Kiss Me Quick. Its flowers go from like deep purple to lavender to white in 3 days. A very powerful shamanic plant, one of the favorites of the Peruvian world. When I started to work with this plant, the upper level of the situation started to open up, and so I started to connect with the stars, and that was very confusing because you can start to get downloads about like all kinds of things about the history of humanity. And at that time I was studying a lot of the, ancient Sumerian texts, talking about the creation of humanity. And so you're kind of bridging the gap between things you've read and then things you're starting to receive with your own personal channel. And it's, a lot of discernment going into like, okay, I read this feels right. And then you get downloads in your ceremony that can start to open your mind up to, okay, like this is this piece feels right, this piece feels off. and so on and so forth. And
What's
that can,
connected and what's not, right?
yeah, yeah. And so like this celestial thing started to happen, and it was very interesting with the dragon energy and all this kind of stuff. And then when I got married, it was just like, okay, let's get your car fixed. Let's make sure your income is good. Like the nuts and bolts of life. So things like kind of became much more terrestrial there for a while. And when I got more of that in order, then things started to open up on the Pleiadian side of town, which has been the beautiful adventure of the last few years. And so it's like it's pretty much the coolest thing in the world, and everybody's experience is different, but it's always like personal because the ayahuasca, the grandmother, the pipe, the hotline to Pachamama, the earth, that's individual for everyone, and so they see us come in, warts and all. And the love, a lot of people talk about ayahuasca as like a grandmother spirit, and I've found that to be true. Now, she can kick your butt like fully, like, but initially it was that like loving, embracing, like warm hug of the grandmother energy that allowed me to feel safe. And yeah, the lessons, come in larger and larger fonts until you start to like really do the work. And then when you do the work, the next level of the mystery kind of unveils, and you just kind of proceed that way.
That's crazy. So you said that you did some like drawing and obviously like writing. Did you have any breakthroughs with your music, or you had talked about wanting
Oh,
to release some of this? So how did this then start to impact you and your playing?
yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking that question. So I was always really comfortable picking. I could pick fast, pick good. It was just easy. But the
You're being
singing,
humble. This dude absolutely shreds. Like
for
and you're so calm while you do it, right? Like it's crazy. But sorry, I just they need to know.
no, that'd be an interesting the thing to talk about here uh, in a bit. That balance of the energy and trying to stay calm at the same time. But the singing, like I could sing on pitch, but it didn't really sound that great. Every now and then have a good moment. It's interesting how some people can sing on key and it won't sound good, but some people can sing off key and it'll sound good. Like, so that's how does that happen? But anyway, so one of the songs that I had written after an adventure in the States, I started to sing that in ceremony, and I was able to find my voice with it. I was able to find my heart
Oh
through the music.
wow.
So when you grow up and you're singing like, oh, the 9 pound hammer, just a little too heavy, buddy for my size, you're singing about, digging coal when you're 12 years old. You can't relate to it at all. You know, in my case, I was singing like, will the circle be unbroken about my dead mother when my mother is right beside me singing
Prominent
along.
figure in your life.
And so like this disconnect between like the actual like heart of the music and what's coming out of my mouth, that was a big thing. Peter Owen sometimes calls it the remove. Like you can kind of hide behind these bluegrass songs a
Mm.
little bit. They're so universal. But all that to say that singing the song that I had written, My Heart is Welcome Here, in ceremony, I was able to make that connection with my heart. Be like, okay, this is real. This is like my story. This is something that I fully feel and love, and just that expansive heart connection started to develop there. And it's a moving target, and sometimes I can feel like I can sing pretty good, and sometimes it's not there, but we wouldn't want it too easy. But all that to say is that the plant medicine really helped me find that resonance with my spirit coming out of the singing. Yeah.
That's really cool. And so then let's double back to this because like all right you say oh I can pick like I've watched so many videos of you. I was lucky enough 2 years ago in Asheville. All this started because of me folding a poster, which was at that Asheville show.
Yeah.
And you came out and so I am a sucker for the mandolin. Like I am a sucker for the mandolin. I always have been. I've been to over a dozen Tellurides, and Sam Bush is the mayor. I love David
Yeah.
Grisman. My mom was a Deadhead, so like the pizza tapes and things like this. And
Uh-huh.
and then I started seeing, and Jared would play this song, right? And I always called and I met Jared and I told him this and he said it wasn't weird, so I'm going to repeat it. But I called Jared Walker my baby bird, and I'm always like, set my baby bird free. And when he starts playing the opening notes of West Dakota Rose, I will scream at the top of my lungs, burn this motherfucker down, Jared, because that song just absolutely rips. And then I went and watched you play it, and like the ease and how quick you chop. And then I saw the two of you play together at that show, and I was fucking dumbfounded. I had this beautiful video. I sent it to your mom because I was like, Chris just needs this. Like you need this. And it was so fucking cool. And then to see like, hey, you did it again. And then with this podcast, I was like, I've been talking to people that I would just love to talk to, right? And so like I've
Yeah.
always known that you're this interesting soul. And I was like, I'm fucking reaching out to Chris Henry because like I want to talk to him about this, right? And so I want to talk about like that speed, right? Like how you're able to like, because like I just saw it in a video with Michael Cleveland and Jason Carter too. Like you're just ripping, and you look like you could be in anyone's living room, just and it's insane. So like, how are you able to connect the brain and your hands, or is it just like? Because I always tell people they're like, "Hey, how do you do this?" And I'm like Will Ferrell in Old School when he's doing like the podium at the end. Like I black out. I don't remember anything that I asked. People are like, "Can you repeat that?" I'm like, "No, I have no idea what I said," and then I just come back. Is it kind of like that when you're playing, or like how do you find that balance? Like what? Like it's just for me as a non-musician. Like how does that work?
Yeah. This is a wonderful question. So people come to the music many different ways for many different reasons. I really wanted to learn how to play fast because my mom played fast, my dad played fast. I was just really into this upbeat energy. And so I wanted to learn how to play Rawhide, Bill Monroe's flagship instrumental. And once I kind of got that underneath my fingers, I was like, yeah, this feels great. I want to learn all the fast tunes, and this is my thing. I love, the blues and, slower, more moderate tempos, all that kind of stuff too. But my favorite thing was playing fast. And so that became like my specialty. And it was the thing that I pursued the most. Like I would practice playing fast and, playing with my dad. He would rip and just trying to be able to catch up with him and hold on. And that's really advantageous for a young person to be able to be around like a master who's playing real fast and real clean. Um, and so you kind of get the idea about how the energy is supposed to flow. And yes, so like learning your raw hides and your bluegrass breakdowns and your daybreak and Dixie, all that kind of stuff, just teaches you so much about how to play fast and play clean. And so another big influence on me was this guy named David McLaughlin, who's the mandolin player with the Johnson Mountain Boys. And he's very well known for playing, speeds upwards of, 180, 190, maybe even touching 200 with the Johnson Mountain Boys. And he's my cousin. He lives here in Winchester. He played in Mom and Dad's band. And so these two, just absolute legends of mandolin and speed were in my life. And so I was just trying to catch up with them and get to where I could hold on. And then when I moved to Nashville, I really started even kind of taking it to the next level, to be able to play the folded scale, upwards of 200, beats per minute. That was something I learned from Thiele. And obviously he can play really fast and really clean. So I went with that. And that kind of helped open up, the rest of my technical ability to the point where I could play just about as fast and as clean as I could. And then at that point, I remember I had this one kind of revelatory moment where I was playing down at Layla's on Broadway in Nashville. And this is one of these like 4 hour, $50, bar gigs where nobody's really listening to you. Anyway, I was just like shredding my face off and I wasn't getting anything out of it. So I had to kind of, go the other way towards minimalism and learn how to get more out of less. But just kind of circling back to the idea about, being calm and staying centered, because there's this kind of, big, question about how you're supposed to approach that energy. I remember Peter Rowan asked Blaine Sprouse, who was playing fiddle with him at the time. He said, Blaine, is there any way to, be relaxed and play this music? And Blaine goes, I don't think so. So it's always managing this balance between this really intense energy and physicality and staying calm at the same time. Just circling back to talking about playing West Dakota Rose with those boys last year. So when I was making an attempt to make my living playing bluegrass, I stayed in practice. I was playing a lot of gigs, and then over the last few years, I've just mostly been sitting on the couch and teaching, beginner, intermediate mandolin, some more advanced students like Wyatt and all that. But all I have to say is that I haven't really been in practice, and I've been okay with that largely. But when you're jumping up on stage with a band like Jason Carter or Billy Strings, these boys are in practice. Michael Cleveland, who stays in practice,
Hmm.
then you can definitely reflect on where you are. And I'm 44 now. It's not as easy to rip at those super high speeds cleanly as it was in my mid 30s and all that kind of stuff. So jumping up on stage with Billy, and I remember the moment there when there's all these people out there and the energy was great and the song was flowing and all that kind of stuff. And I think Billy just finished his guitar break or whatever. And so then I'm like, okay, what are you going to do here? And I knew that if I kind of launched in with some really powerful octaves, just leaning into the mandolin just about as hard as I could, then it would generate a lot of energy, just like going for the projection, going for that going for that transmission of energy. And so I leaned into those octaves, and that worked, and the energy kind of built and all that kind of stuff. But then on the back half of my break, because I started out on 10, and if you start out on 10, then you basically have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And you've got to keep that energy going. And like West Dakota Rose is a long form. It's like a
Hmm.
minute long, like to play it all the way through. So at the end of it, I was just barely, barely hanging on to it. And then I had to play it all again one more time because everybody plays at the very end. And
Yep.
so I was just, it was messy and the tone wasn't very good. The energy was kind of there, but I was just barely hanging on for dear life. So this year, when we were going to go again, I was like, okay, I have a few days to practice. And so I
Oh
sat down
man,
and
this year it is so crisp, Chris.
ah,
I've listened to multiple of the two versions multiple different times, and I was like, oh man, it was so good to see you play that first time, but the one in Asheville in 2025 is so good.
yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I felt like I was much more in practice and I kind of, worked on a break for like the B parts the last time through to just kind of like be thoughtful about what might be cool to play there. So I
Yeah.
worked it out. It's kind of like, something, with some kind of, Van Halen-y kind of, rock and roll licks at the end. And Billy was kind of put some of that stuff at the end of his break. So it parlayed good in that way. And I was able to kind of pull it off. And then I was reflecting on that because I was like, okay, that was good. And you kind of did what you were trying to do, but the spirit of that tune is really not one of like I'm gonna work out my break and I'm gonna play it note for note. The
Oh,
spirit of that,
really?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so let's talk about this. Where were you in your career when you started writing West Dakota Rose, and how was that process like? And I would love to because it's literally one of my favorite songs.
yeah. And I love to talk about that. And I'll tell this kind of subjectively funny story about the name of it, which I've never like told publicly. I've never even told Billy or Jared this. I did talk about it with Billy, failing. When I was up there in Nashville, a couple weeks ago. I was in a relationship in Nashville. I was living with a woman on, and apologies to all parties that should be apologized to for this because this is a little bit of an unbecoming story, but it's a little bit funny too. So I was dating a woman, and we lived on Dakota Avenue. And I decided, okay, this relationship isn't working out. I want to break up. And so we broke up. And then I was like, well, no, let's stay together. And she's like, no, we broke up. That was good. And so I was like shattered from that, and it took some time to heal, and went down to Peru and kind of plant some medicine. I was kind of started to feel better, started to date a little bit more, and I was dating another woman that also lived on Dakota Avenue, but she lived on West Dakota Avenue. So I figured if I named it West Dakota Rose, that if either one of them heard it or saw the title of the tune, they might think it was about them. It was really about woman number two, but I was kind of just playing both. It's kind of gross and
Dog you.
unbecoming. But yeah, so the woman number two, Emily Rose, her name was Emily Rose, and so she lived on West Dakota Avenue. So it's really about this woman. I wrote it out in Grass Valley, and And one interesting thing about it was that she was a champion amateur equestrianist. So she did like dressage, and I go like see her
And
practice.
she's trotting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. She doing
that's
some,
awesome.
and so this horse energy was in the relationship. It was in the field, and it ended up coming through this tune, West Dakota Rose. And so when like the fan art came out with Billy Strings, it was like a skeleton riding a horse. And I remember talking to Billy about it. He's like, yeah, it's like riding a horse out on the plains. I was like, that's so interesting that none of them knew
Had any
about
idea?
the woman or the horse, but this horse medicine was in there, which has been significant with me and the plant medicine, through the journeys there. But anyway, so that's the story about West Dakota Rose. And the melody came out strongest in C sharp minor, which is an unusual key for a mandolin tune. Kind of has some like Monroe double stop textures and stuff in there, but it's really expansive for improvising because you're going from like the C sharp minor to the E major, which is like a harmonic minor to major shift, and then it does that again going from F sharp minor to A, which is the same relationship between those chords. And so you can do like a little motif going from the first two chords, and then you can try that same motif over the second one. And so you're like playing the same thing, but it means different things depending on what chord you're on.
And there's
So
different ways you can get into it. So then, when you're getting into the jam session, did you watch that Rich Beto interview with Billy Strings, and he talked about how he's trying to challenge himself from doing the same thing over and over again?
yeah, I love that interview and love, Billy's humility about all that. But like, well, everybody's telling me I can rip, but I'm not really satisfied with what's
Yeah,
going on.
God damn it, Billy! Like, please, do we need to say it louder? Like, how many more people have to tell you that? But he's so humble, and it's so cool because, like, then listening to him talk about like some of those jazz rips, right? And then like how Escanaba came from like working up the scale. It's like
Yeah, I love that.
it's so cool how your guys' brain works. But like when we think about like jams or like coming into something, do you have like an old trusty, right? Is there something that like you just like, oh, I'm gonna get into something similar to this and then like get after it? But like going, like I said, listening to 2024's version to 2025's version, like yes, it is the same song, but it is not the same song.
Yeah, yeah. So there's like the stuff that's programmed so deeply into your muscle memory that it's just gonna like come out that you don't have to think about. And West Dakota Rose is kind of cool because you can kind of get into some of the pentatonic stuff, which just kind of works over that chord sequence. So there's kind of stuff living in the tune in different tunes that will emerge different ways. But it's a really good one for like motivic playing because you can kind of do arpeggiated stuff. You can kind of do like noodly kind of just. One of my favorite things about it is that if you get lost a little bit in there because of the way the chords shift around, you'll usually end up finding something that works. And if there is a little bit of dissonance that happens with a happy accident, that can mutate into something really cool.
You can
And,
find your way home.
yeah, yeah. So if you're off by one note, you can kind of work on that a little bit. Be like, okay, what's in there, and then get back to your chord shapes and play stuff through the arpeggios. And yeah, and it's kind of slipping in. So I wish I had my mandolin right here. I'd do a little something. But yeah, so West Dakota Rose has been, I loved it, and I played a lot in the band. And then so I played a lot with Corey Walker, Jared's
Yep.
brother was playing banjo in the hardcore grass back in the day. So I'm not sure exactly how Jared became aware of the tune or if it was Billy's idea for that to be a mandolin feature. But I remember I wasn't having the best day. I was just kind of sitting in my studio and this is when I kind of like had made the transition from trying to make a living playing music to teaching. And I wasn't like really in love with teaching yet. I have
Yeah.
fallen in love with teaching and we can talk about that. But
Yeah, no, that was the next thing that I was going to start asking you about.
yeah, so I'm like sitting there and I'm like, doing these like note for note, Bill Monroe videos and like, studying out somebody else's music. And there's the whole like dynamic about like, well, how much time you spend studying and figuring out somebody else's music versus like what you're wanting to do with your own
Creating
creativity.
your own.
And I'm just sitting there and this like video kind of pops up from like an unknown number, no contact. And I hit play and it sees like, hippie boys, hairy legged boys like sitting down and they're playing the West Dakota Rose. I was like, who even is this? And I didn't recognize him because I guess like Jared had grown a beard or whatever. And I
Yeah.
was like, who is it? I was like, okay, that's Jared. I was like, whoa, this is Billy Strings and the boys. And they were working at West Dakota Rose for the first time.
That's
And it was
awesome.
just such a huge like lift to my
So
spirit.
your heart must have just been singing. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, yeah, super cool. I never actually talked about how they had the idea to start doing the tune, but of course they've played it, 30 times, live and put it in front of millions of people's ears, and people are playing it and people are learning it and people are, connecting with that with the joy and the creativity in there. And I just love it.
My boys in Magoo, who are an up and coming band here in
Man,
Colorado,
they got a great group.
they shred West Dakota.
They do. They even put like a halftime thing in there, which I never thought about that.
Yes,
Cool.
yes,
Creative.
no, it's super fun. And then hearing Dylan on the dobro and Portland just rip on the man. Like I said, I'm a sucker for the man. So like, I'm like, oh yes, please. And it's just so cool. And then to hear you, and obviously you come from a line of teachers, right? And so
Yeah.
it's people always say, okay, it's one thing to be able to do it, to be able to teach it. I feel like you become even more masterful in your craft because you have to think about how to explain things or lead people down a track. Because like for you, you may just like test it out, try things. Like you're like, oh, I'm one key off. Like how do I work through this? Well,
Yeah.
now you're teaching someone what they need to do to like work through that. So
Yeah.
how has the journey been being a teacher on your own?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting because like the first big threshold of like falling in love with it had to be with like the acceptance that my efforts like running a band were unsuccessful. Like I tried as hard as I could. The universe was like, good job, but just stop. I had 125 people play in my band in like 3 or 4 years, which is
Oh
a
wow.
lot.
Yeah.
Often trying to get people to do stuff that they weren't that good at instead of like focusing on what they were really good at and working with that. And so that kind of medicine in itself was challenging. But, I had this foundation of teaching, and mom back in the late 70s, she found that when she taught by ear, of course she's a great by ear teacher. When you're learning by ear, things become much more musical. Tab can be a crutch, like you're kind of stopping your development of the ear. It can be a little bit harder at first, making the connection with the inner music and the outer music. But the thing that I've learned in the last, 2 or 3 years with my own students is that that's the name of the game. You got to be able to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. You got to be able to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain is a wonderfully educational tune to be able to transpose all that stuff. And so with my students, I'm like, okay, you got your grunt work, you got your internal repertoire, which is all these tunes that you've known for your whole life. Old MacDonald Had a Farm, Silent Night, all the Christmas songs, She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain, This Land Is Your Land, You Are My Sunshine, all that stuff that but you got to be able to pick that stuff out easily in the main keys, G and A, and then a closed position like, B flat or G sharp, because once you learn how to play in a closed position, you can take that anywhere. But to be able to find it in different registers, different octaves, with your double stops before you're even really moving on to improvisational devices, arpeggiating or the Monroe style modular devices, all that kind of stuff, which can be a really humbling thing because some people might be able to play, 10 or 20 fiddle tunes. But if you're like, hey, let's hear a little Mary Had a Little Lamb, they're like, what note does it start on? You know, and if you can't find that, then that's a major hole in the foundation. And so, yeah, learning to teach, from mom, and she was one of the first people who kind of gave names to the different most important banjo licks. And so I kind of did that with the Monroe world. It had never been codified in that way. And once you get the hang of like the slidey lick and staggered arpeggios, little bounce lick, in conjunction with being able to find your double stops and good melody playing, you're kind of off to the races. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so you have been helping people obviously similar to this, right? You're doing it online, you're also doing some in person.
Yeah.
We've been super blessed. We were able to have Wyatt on
The
a
amazing
few
Wyatt Ellis. Yeah.
yes, a few weeks ago. So can we talk a little bit about like because like you start to see some of these people and then obviously there's someone like him, right? And like
Yeah.
it's just different, right? So like how is that from like a teaching standpoint? And what has that relationship been like? Because we just talked with Peter last week. You weren't able to make it to his Hall of Fame induction show. And then Wyatt had talked about, he's like, hey, boy, you got any clothes to change into? And he's like, oh my God, I was so mortified. But like, it's so cool to like see this and see these intermingling relationships. So, like, how
Yeah.
did that start? And how did that obviously continue to grow? He looks up to you so much, and then obviously we're all just watching this kid just continue to rise.
Yeah. He's amazing. He's so unique. I met him during COVID because on Facebook there's a group called the Monroe Mandolin Appreciation Society, and every year we do this tune writing contest. And one of the guys that actually the guy who came up with that group idea, his name's Roscoe Morgan, really excellent mandolin player and singer out in East Tennessee. He was Wyatt's first teacher. And so they had written a tune together and they submitted it and it won the contest. And then the next couple
Of
of years,
course it did.
you know, Wyatt won the contest on his own because that was one of the things that he just took off like a rocket with instrumental composition, especially in the Monroe sound and texture. But during COVID, there wasn't much to do but sit around and pick a mandolin. And so I started teaching these mandolin workshops focused on Monroe style with Dave McLaughlin from the Johnson Mountain Boys. And why I started coming to the workshops. And so in the beginning, we were going every week and studying one song or one tune. And then within about 2 years, I started teaching them, between 1 and 3 hours a week for 2 or 3 years. And he just so the combination with Wyatt is that he loves the music on a very deep level. I tend to think that it's quite possible that he might have done a lot of work in his last life artistically, like getting him ready for this incarnation. So by the time he was like 11 years old, this music was just like pouring out of him.
He's
I,
such an old soul, and he like foundationally he knows all of it, right? And
I think
like
he knows more note for note Monroe stuff than anyone has ever learned at that age, far surpassing me or anybody in terms of like knowing to the nucleus, like arrangements on like, upwards of like 100 songs and tunes. And so and his mom really helped him like stay focused with his
his mom's an amazing lady. She's amazing.
yeah,
We've
she
been able to
as
connect with
talented
her.
as he is in her own way with her proclivities in the music business, because it takes the talent and then it takes the team, and he's got that in spades on both sides. And it's been great to kind of get to know him in the sense that like we're wired a lot the same. Like, we like a lot of the same energy, like the Monroe style. We like the expansive improvising. He took lessons with Sierra also. So
Hmm.
he's kind of getting the best of both worlds and like the modern kind of clean way of playing. He can do that good. And then we can get down and dirty too. And so one of my big challenges with and opportunities with Wyatt was to be able to kind of bridge the gap between the things that we have the commonality in, like we like a lot of the same stuff, but letting him or encouraging him and supporting him when he's finding his own voice, because he's so creative and he's got his own ideas, he's got his own influences. He was taking lessons from tons of people, and a lot of those people ended up on his first album. He wrote instrumentals with a bunch of his, probably 10 or 12 of his early teachers, and that album's so good. But yes, so like, and then helping him get started with his guitar and with his songwriting, and he's starting to write some good songs now, co-writing with different folks, to Alex Leach and his band, who's been such a good influence on him with regard to like the Stanley style of like singing and expression, which really has a lot of resonance with Wyatt's spirit. He's becoming a real good singer too. So
We
yeah,
take a pause. We pause. Will you mute and then unmute because it's starting to fuzz up again?
yeah, I hear my fan.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, I think it's different, but I think it is like
Because now it's gone. Now unmute it.
yeah,
Oh, maybe it is just the fan.
yeah, that's the fan, and it might calm down, or it might not. So we
It's
go.
fine. No, we'll just write it out because I mean you've given me so much of your time, and I can't. appreciated enough, Chris.
Ah,
Um, so with Wyatt, for him, and as he's like continuing to grow, what was it as a challenge for you as a teacher that you wanted to instill in him? And what were some of those things that you're like, hey, I really wish that some of this had been taught to me?
yeah, great question. I think that Wyatt did a better job than I did with all the grunt work, like getting his folded scale up to like 200 beats a minute, and just working on his cleanliness, being able to play and any key, really adeptly. Like it was a long time before I could play in like F and B flat, and just because I didn't want to put in that work, and no one was like, "You really need to do this. You really need to do this." I didn't do it, so that stuff came later for me. But he dotted his I's and crossed his T's really good in a technical way. And yeah, so the gift with working with Wyatt is trying to do my best to support his creative like inclinations, but also kind of make sure that you know I reflect. It's also really important to be super mindful about, just because you have all the bells and whistles in the world, to know how to approach the music in a tasteful way, so you're really playing the music instead of playing the mandolin, if that
Mm,
makes sense.
for sure.
And kind of everybody kind of approaches those thresholds different ways. But he was getting a lot of that from David McLaughlin also, who's a big minimalist. And so, Wyatt can like buckle down, he can play it true, just spot on, as simple as possible, and make it sound good. That's one thing that a lot of the modern folks I feel, because pretty much all of the music in the beginning, the first generation, it was like melody, melody, melody all the way.
Mm,
And because they hadn't invented all these Sam Bush licks, they
yeah.
hadn't invented like the Herschel Sizemore and the Adam Steffi and the Sierra Hull and the Chris Thile, all that hadn't been done. And so I think people shy away from playing like really simple, like good country kind of hillbilly melody kind of stuff, because they think it's like too like simple, or it's unbecoming, or it's unflattering, just like
Mm,
to rock on your double stops through a break without having to put in like the flippy dipty triplets and the fingerboard acrobatics and the gymnastics and all that kind of stuff, so you get like a son. Like I like to just like play like ding
like,
diddling
God damn, boy.
ding diddling ding 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 diddling ding ding diddling. When I hear that, my ears are like, yay! It doesn't have to be like so,
Yeah.
all the time. But it's as a young person, you want to kind of test the limits of all that kind of stuff and do all the explorations. And I think he does a good job of kind of honing in on the heart of the tune. And of course, we're all a work in progress. So it'll be, really interesting to see him develop, as it is to see so many of our musical heroes, get better, like, Billy Strings, digging in there and like finding
It's
all
crazy to think Billy Strings is a
more stuff.
guitar teacher, right? Like,
Yeah, right.
but that's what's so cool. And so what I wanted to ask is, are you still teaching? And if there were some people that are listening, how would they get in contact with you, or where would they go to learn? Because I know, first off, you have a YouTube channel that has a ton of awesome resources to people. But if
Yeah.
somebody wanted to like reach out to you, are you still teaching lessons? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So my music business is called Noya Mountain Music, Noya Mountain Music, and noyamountainmusic.com. You can get a hold of me. You can check the calendar, do the online booking portal thing. And if you ever get through Charlotte, I do like, master classes. Somebody will come for like a weekend and we'll do like 4 hours a day on a Friday and a Saturday. That kind of thing can be really empowering for folks. But yeah, the YouTube channel, the Noy Mountain Music, it's just, I think it's if you just type in YouTube, Christopher Henry Mandolin Noy Mountain Music, you'll find your way there. We put out.
We'll link it in the podcast episode. But then, more
Yeah.
importantly, Christopher, where can we see you? Because obviously, like I said, I just saw you. You popped up on a few shows with Michael Cleveland and Jason Carter.
Yeah.
You guys did an awesome 55-minute live pick in somebody's living room, or maybe it was an Airbnb,
Rehearsal,
or
that was fun.
yeah. But so like, I'm loving watching you play. I can see that you're loving doing it again. So, are
Yeah.
you still hitting the road? What is the future like for Chris Henry as the musician, not just the teacher?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, and I'm kind of making some, decisions about that in my life. Like the most important thing in my life is, being able to I've really like I got really into like staying at the house, and so I'm not a road dog like I was, and so to me
Yep.
it's fun to go out and play a little bit here and there, fill in with Wyatt a little bit. Peter's got a couple bluegrass gigs here and there. It's been great to, fill in with Jason Carter. But as far as me like being out there on the road, I'm not sure that's in the cards like it might have been a while back, but still feeling into that. I haven't, been pursuing like my own music. I've got an album called Heart Spaces on Spotify. It's medicine music, and that's really where my heart is.
That's
And
why it's
so
called
I
Heart
love to,
Spaces.
like, yeah, my favorite place to sing is, often in an ayahuasca ceremony, for people who are like all tuned in to the local quantum wah, as it were. And so I'd love to do more of my own music and just kind of feeling into those
Have
up.
you ever thought about taking people on trips, on journeys with you down to Peru?
Yeah, we have done a little bit of that. Brought some of our friends down there for powerful transformational experiences. It can be a little bit tricky when you're bringing folks down there, but you want to be focused on your own work too.
For
And so
sure.
the last couple of times we've just gone down, by ourselves, but we have done that, you know, and want to, do what we can to connect people with the music. And these kind of conversations, I love to have them. So if anybody wants to reach out and talk about medicine, would invite that. Yeah, I'm easy to get a hold of. Christopher at noiamountainmusic.com. You can send me an email, check out the website. And yeah, so
And
my
where would they see some of your one off shows? Because obviously you're not hitting the road. He's not going to come to your backyard. So we got to come to his. So where do we find the shows on what you will be playing as they come up?
yeah, so if you subscribe to the Noise Mountain Music newsletter, uh, what little touring I do does get listed there. And if
Show up to Asheville. Every year, Billy Strings plays Asheville. This has now become a thing, okay? Like, you
I
can't
will,
not be.
I will keep doing that, I reckon, as long as the opportunity is there. But, also if anybody wants me to come to their backyard barbecue and sing for an hour or two, these things are possible. So feel free to reach out if that seems like it's something.
Support local artists. Well, Christopher, I can't thank you enough.
All
I always tell people like I love this podcast because I get to talk to people that I never would get an opportunity to ask the questions that I would just do if I was just to like corner you in a restaurant, right? But now I get to share it with other people, and it is so fun, and I'm so blessed, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time today. And I'm excited to share your story, and more excited, I'm ready to watch you burn that motherfucker to the ground.
Well, I appreciate all your good energy and the invitation here. I think you got a good thing going here, and feel free to reach out if I can ever help you down the road. We got to stick together.
Oh man, I love it. I say homies helping homies, right? Because
Yeah.
when we have an energy and we're doing it for the right reasons, it just connects. And that's why like Billy fucking reached out to me because of this. Like literally like FaceTime me. And like it's been so wild because then I started like building a relationship with some of these people are like my musical idols. Like I was like, oh fuck it, I'm gonna reach out to Peter Rowan. Like, how cool would it be as a deadhead to then talk to Peter Rowan? And he's like, oh yeah, I'd love to. I'm like, are you fucking kidding? I talked to you, and it's like, oh my god, like this is so fucking cool. and
That's kind of
and
the coolest thing about the bluegrass world. Might not be the same thing if you're trying to, get a hold of Paul McCartney or Robert Plant,
yeah,
something
yeah, nobody's gonna give a shit, right? But that's why I love bluegrass, and like it's played such a prominent role in my life, and it's blowing up with some of these bigger bands, but also like let's give some of these other voices that aren't as seen or heard and give them a chance, and then share that love, right? Because yeah,
like.
there's the internet, but like what I told people is like when I was coming up in the late 90s and early 2000s, like I couldn't like Google bluegrass musicians, right? Like I didn't know like, oh, this is Jeff Austin saying, hey, I'm gonna sing a Hartford tune. I'm going, who the fuck is Hartford? And then I like find out John Hartford, and then like now your whole world goes open, right? And it's like, oh, the Stanley brothers, and it's like Carter and Ralph, and you're like, okay, well, what the fuck is this? And then it's like Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. You're like, oh, okay, like what the fuck? And then obviously, like Monroe is like a whole different beast. And then you start seeing like these intermittent, like Grisman and Bush, and like this new generation in like the 60s and 70s. And then it's like, fuck, now we're starting to see from like the late 90s into now, it's so cool to see what's happening with bluegrass. And like I can only imagine like where it's going to continue to go, because it's been a fucking wonderful journey, and I'm just so happy to be part on the ride. It's nuts, man. I was in Atlanta for Billy, and some guy drove an hour to interview me for his podcast. And I cried talking about being at the 50th Telluride Festival with my daughters, telling them, hey, you're going to be able to bring your families to the 100th, right? Like, mommy and daddy won't be here. And I cried. But it's like, that's so powerful, right? And that music is so powerful. And it started like with my mom and dad and that pillar, and like continue to share this. And then like, doing stuff like this, if this turns somebody on, like even if it's one person, like how fucking cool is that, right? So I thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you. Uh, Thank you for everything, Chris. Go enjoy the rest of your weekend, man. Thanks, brother.